Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, company on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And as I continue along 11 years in to this cosmic journey, I realize that I really have tapped into a milieu of artists that are healers. And if you go back to the beginning of civilization, that was the tool and the instrument, especially in the motherland of Africa, where music was used as a healing force. And for so many of the guests that I've interviewed who were alive and on the bandstand long before I was ever created, they felt that, and they knew what it was about, and they learned from the masters because there was a domestic touring circuit and because there was an apprenticeship. And there were opportunities to play live with people that maybe had 3 teeth, or, you played to an audience of 5 people, but it was still burning music. And people, as Art Blakey would say, his job was to wash away the dust of everyday life for the people that came in and to see this kind of music. And my guest today is somebody who really kind of was able to catch the I don't want to say the tail end, but definitely the back end of the gravy years of live touring musician. He played with so many of his elders, and then through that live experience was able to sort of cut above the morass of everybody else and develop his own individual sound. Today, despite the extended pause, he continues to wade into uncharted waters in the jam band scene, which quite frankly seems to be a little bit more fertile and vital than the scene that we know as jazz. But it's really an high honor to connect with John Scofield. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake.
John, can I ask you how much live experience, bandstand experience you had in Connecticut before you went to Berklee?
Oh, well, I started, in junior high rock band, which, I probably started in, playing gigs really when I was like 12, and we played weekend dances at various schools, and we became kind of popular in a couple of towns. I'm talking about kind of popular. and that kept going through junior high into high school. But, we would play weekends, so I got to do that. It wasn't like working 8 to 2 at Birdland.
No, I did. So let's talk. So it's fair to say that when you were coming up, I've talked,
Jake, when I was coming up,
yeah,
the live music scene was still really happening. When I was in high school, I wasn't able to do it so much, but towards the end of high school, I did. There were clubs where bands, crappy rock bands played every weekend. And even when I was a kid in Connecticut, the drinking age was 21, but the drinking age in New York was 18.
Right.
So there were all these clubs along the border of New York State and Connecticut where, unfortunately, the kids from Connecticut would drive over and drink and dance and then try and get home.
Oh, man.
And they had bands in all of them. And I had a phony ID one summer when I was maybe, 16, that allowed me to play in clubs. And we would, in the summer, we worked a lot. I remember we did 3 weeks of every night, and so I got a little bit of that, but mainly I was a bystander in an era when the older kids who were in bands and had become professional musicians would work all the time.
Did you know this cat Link Chamberlain?
Yeah, I'm from Norwalk. I'm from Wilton, which is next to Norwalk.
And that's where Link was from?
Link was from Norwalk.
Dude, Spinoza, I want you to talk about Link because, dude, that dude died so young, and he was a mentor to Spinoza.
You even know about him.
Wow.
And David Spinoza, who I don't know real well, but when we have met and talked, he was a Link fanatic.
A Link freak, man. And because David grew up in Portchester, but I talk about Link. I wasn't sure where the closest city you lived. You say Norwalk.
Norwalk,
Yeah.
which was, not that far from Portchester. And Portchester was the town right next to Connecticut, one of the towns that had a lot of bars. And Link was from Norwalk. And when I was just getting my guitar, I went to Perillo's music store in Norwalk when I was 12. And on the wall, there was this picture of this band. And they had like Everly Brothers kind of haircuts as a verse to Beatle haircuts, which had just come out, the Beatle haircut. So these guys were already older. And the guy who ran the music store was like, yeah, that's the Orchids, kid,
Wow.
And they were this band from my area who had gotten good enough to play in the city. They played and in all the clubs wherever, but they also had made a record on Roulette Records, Twistin' at the Round Table, which was
I've seen that and change. Okay, go ahead, continue.
But that was the Round Table was I think Birdland turned into the Round Table or something like that. Anyway, so these guys, they now I never heard the Orchids. Really, I never heard them live. The little band that I played in of kids from Norwalk, one of them had an older brother, and he was a big Orchids fan, and he played me the record and the legends of Link and the Orchids. Link had light strings before they had light strings. He kind of came up with putting a banjo string on the high E and using the high E from the set as the B string, so he could bend notes and stuff. And he was legendary in that area. And I didn't even know until adulthood, fairly recently, how famous he was among the musicians, because then I knew about Link later on.
Sure.
When he became a jazz musician and was playing in Portchester a lot at a club called Rapson's, and Dave Liebman played with him. And this was long after the Orchids, but the Orchids were my first sort of peep of this guy who was, he gave guitar lessons in Norwalk. But
so a couple questions.
Let me just
do
finish.
it, man. Do it.
Just one thing, because this is hilarious. About him. So I meet Spinoza, and somehow he's talking about, Link and the Orchids. They were the greatest thing I ever heard in my life. And then I read Levon Helm's biography.
Oh boy.
And in there, he talks about, we used to play at this club, and then the Orchids, they were really good.
Wow.
And then they got a guy from one of the singers or something from the Orchids came and joined their band, the Hawks, And then my guitar teacher, who was kind of a Link acolyte, maybe, or he was actually in competition with Link, would talk about the Orchids and stuff. And then I met Levon Helm. I sat in with him at his gig up there in Woodstock. And after I saw him, I said, Link, I said, Levon, what about the Orchids? And he goes, oh yeah, Link and the Orchids, best bands that ever existed.
But the Hawks at the time, I mean, I've interviewed Ronnie. Do we know who the singer was that joined because all those cats were from Canada, right? I mean, it was Levon and Ronnie and
yeah, those guys were playing in New York at that point. It was later on when they had left Ronnie Hawkins.
Wow.
And they started their own thing. And if you look in the biography, it talks about we got the singer, a guy from the Orchids, whose name I forget, because he wasn't Bobby Burgess, who was the famous singer from the Orchids. It was some other singer none of this is famous. This is all.
This is so why I knew.
This is a suburban New York legend,
Did you join the union at 12? Or you were off the books?
I joined the Norwalk local when I was like 16 or something, just because my guitar teacher, Alan Dean, told me that I should be in the union. And then when I went to school in Boston at Berklee, I had my union card from down there in case any union gigs came up, which would occasionally happen. And there would occasionally be a union guy there who wanted to see your card. And then when I moved to New York City, I transferred to Local 802 and I transferred my membership from Norwalk, Connecticut.
I ask you that question just because, in your mind, there was never, there are so many interesting I just wonder, like, in today's world, you have cats that are going on scholarship or they're going to go to the academy, and there's no real guarantee that there's going to necessarily be steady live work as a musician. And was there ever a doubt in your mind that this was what you were going to do? And I'm talking about like cooking on the bandstand. Like, I'm just talking about being a professional musician, not like, did you always have that in your mind's eye?
I thought I would do that. And if I didn't make it, I would play weddings and bar mitzvahs because I was good enough to do that, and to play in lousy bands, which had work. And I knew I could, work at a local guitar store or something. I was never, I'd never thought that I would be able to do what I've been able to do. I feel very lucky that way. But yes, in those days, there was this way to support yourself that doesn't exist anymore.
Can you just talk about, as best you can, especially for younger cats? I mean, you were really able to and I'm talking like, I'm going back to like late 60s, kind of before, whenever you kind of first started to, I mean, you left Berklee. Did you graduate or did you leave early?
No, I left because I had gigs.
That is so insane in today's world. The idea that like some kids like, hey mom, I'm leaving Berklee. I'm dropping out, or I'm not going to finish. You talk about, were you playing the Combat Zone, by the way, in Boston?
No, but I knew about the Combat Zone.
I'm surprised you didn't play the Combat Zone.
Pardon me?
I'm surprised you weren't playing down. There was a great gigs for the students.
Those were the good gigs. I didn't. But no, I just played whatever. There was Combat Zone were the stripper gigs,
Exactly.
And there were like organ groups and stuff that played down there. And I forgot what your original question was, but there was this way for a musician to make a living, and you would play a lot. And before my time, there was even more of it, and to be a freelance musician in New York City, you could work a whole lot and it wouldn't really be good gigs, but you'd be playing your instrument constantly,
Constant.
No, that's what I did. When I moved to, when I lived in Boston, I played a lot, of jam sessions and hangouts and whatever crappy jazz gigs were around when I was, 18, 19, and weddings and club dates, really strange, what they call club dates, with professional older musicians who were up there that would hire guys from Berklee to play at their little shitty gigs.
Can you play, wait, because I know, I think Herb Pomeroy had a great big band. Who did you play with? Like some of the elders?
Well, I knew Herb. I studied with Herb. Herb was the, he was really the main guy in Boston in a lot of ways. Yeah. And had, in the 50s, Herb and Ray Santisi and a bass player named John Neves.
Paul Overton, maybe?
And I don't know if he was up there or not. He might have been.
Santisi, definitely. Yeah. No, I know that Neves guy, dude. He was.
But these guys played at a club that Herb found them a steady gig at a place called the Stables. Wow. And they actually played small group, what I've heard, small group a few nights, and then would have the big band, Herb's big band, on weekends, like all the time. And a lot of those guys were still on the scene in the 60s, I started Berklee in 1970, and a lot of those guys were still around, and Herb was, teaching, arranging, and would still get big band gigs, but he had a big band that actually worked, every Friday night or something,
Well, because, I know that because I've done a couple of interviews. I mean, I'm so fired up to talk to you, but I talked to Mike Knock, and Knock was in that band.
He knows.
But I did you catch, I mean, it was just a clip. That intro song coming in, I don't know if you recognize that.
Yeah, what is that?
Okay, so I want to just I need to get the story in this, Sco, because I have an extra copy. I'm going to mail it to you. This is not on your discography anywhere, man. 1970. Who would have ever thought that Lionel Hampton would have made the best disco record in history?
And
you're on. It's Al Foster. It's Al Foster, and I'm wondering if Laird and Knock were in Boston still when you.
No.
Because, dude, John, you're playing on this. This is the greatest disco album I've ever heard in my life. You're doing Saturday Night Fever. It's unbelievable, man.
It's called Saturday Night Jazz Fever.
Dude, you got it, man, dude. And Tio's on it.
Man, we made 2 records with Hamp. And,
you made another record with Hamp? I got what record is that?
Another one called. Well, okay, that's Saturday Night Jazz Fever.
Absolutely, dude. My daughter's in it. That's all we listen to.
Another one that
I need to know. I need it.
It might have been the music from Grease.
Whoa, dude. It was another movie cover or play kind of.
Yeah. It was another thing like that. And these things were Tio Macero was involved in these.
Yes.
As producer, and he hired the band, and Mike Knock got me on it because I was playing with Knock. Mike was long past his Berklee days and was in New York, and he was really nice to me. Got me some work, and we played at a club called Sweet Basil's a lot because he got a lot of gigs there.
Wow.
And Al was the famous drummer in town. Rick Laird had already played with Mahavishnu Orchestra, was probably in it at that time, and I remember sometimes Steve Kahn played some of the date too.
It was just you. It was a guy, George Devins. And then and George Young was on. I'm trying, dude. It is blistering. But no, that album was made, around the time Saturday Night Fever came out. But when you got to Berklee, who was it? Was Knock still there or no?
Knock was not there.
He was gone. Okay.
In 1970, he had left, but he was one of the guys who was famous already, with us jazz guys, because he had a band called The Fourth Way.
Well, dude, they were pre-Weather Report, man, Fourth Way.
Exactly.
Unbelievable.
And so that was out of New York, so Mike had left. Yeah.
Can you talk about going back to Boston? Well, just because the Lionel Hampton thing was so great, because you had already been, playing.
I got to tell you, too, on that date, Hamp was so nice, and he did not play the melodies. They hired a studio vibraphonist whose name I forget, a nice older guy, to come and read the heads.
No way,
because Hamp didn't want to do that, right?
Dude,
he just got up and blew. The other guy would play the melody, move out of the way, and then Hamp would swing it. Hamp would play a solo.
Dude, I'm telling you, man, I never thought. I mean, I'm a pretty much I could just listen to Bill Evans of the Vanguard all day, but this album, Al Foster, it's not a drum machine, and it's just great because I didn't realize that, because when Hamp's blowing, he's taking the longest solos. It's his album, and I'm waiting for I feel like everybody, you're very measured in your solos, but nobody really wanted to go off that far. It was Hamp's gig.
Well, I think we kind of weren't allowed, it was Hamp's gig. We were just session men, and it was all about Hamp, and it was also on this funny label, Laurie Records.
Oh my God, it's my favorite. Wait, you're telling me Grease too? I need to know what other.
I think it's the music from Grease is the other one. Oh my God. And Mike Knock was in with them. He got me on the date. Mike Knock did, and Tio got Mike an album. Mike did his own album on Laurie Records. And they all had kind of the same record cover because it was very inexpensive.
John, I just want you to talk, not just Hamp, going back to Berklee, what the essence of what you learned, and the guys may not have household names, but the graybeards, the elders that you played with, what did you take away from them the most in terms of the essence? To me, it's with my show, a lot of times no one's going to remember what we talked about, but after they're going to remember how they felt, and that to me is and I just wanted you to talk about what you learned. We always talk about learning from your elders, but so much of this was nonverbal. And I just wanted you to talk about what you learned from these guys.
Well, I learned everything from those guys. And then when I moved to New York with more famous names, but I came from a small town, where I had never really gotten to play any jazz with anybody. We had rock bands, but there was nobody in our area that I knew that played jazz. There actually were people, but I didn't know how to play jazz. I had a guitar teacher. I was trying to learn How High the Moon, and he showed me the chords, and he said, "Oh, just play. Here's a Barney Kessel record." I was at that I was really starting out. When I went to Berklee, I somehow convinced my parents to let me go there, and I went there and just completely immersed myself in music. And I was really lucky because I met some other students that were far better than me. And they were really good. And then I was a drummer named Ted Siebes, who was from Little Rock, Arkansas, who was Alan Dawson, the great drummer, who was teaching at Berklee, his favorite student, And so this kid was already great. He could play. He became my roommate. And then Chip Jackson, who's on the scene in New York playing, he was my other roommate, a bass player. And then, I met and heard Mick Goodrick, the great guitarist.
Dude, are you? And was Laboriel there too, or is that after?
And Abe was a student. He was like a senior.
I love
and
this.
So
Yes.
actually, me and Abe became friends. And the drummer I just spoke about, Ted Siebes, we had a trio. We played some commercial gigs together, and Abe was phenomenal.
Oh my! They didn't even consider the electric bass a legitimate instrument at that time.
Right. Yeah, and Abe just this was pre-Jocko, and Abe was just tearing it up.
So you were playing. Tell me about how. This is so cool. Like, is it fair to say that when you got to Berklee, you really learned jazz as a street scholar.
Yeah.
This was not an academic exercise, jazz for you.
I think learning music is intellectual, Yeah. Part of it is intellectual. And I don't care who you are. Howlin' Wolf has to say, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to blow this hole in the harmonica. I'm going to pick up my guitar and my fingers go here.
Yeah.
That's an intellectual pursuit. And going to Berklee and learning how to read and write music more proficiently than I did, learning, what a major chord and a minor chord is, really, for me, it helped get ready for the real work, which is learning to play by ear.
Absolutely.
So, I'm not against the study of music, but I think we all do it on our own, and if a kid like Miles Davis grew up in St. Louis, East St. Louis, around an active jazz scene and would hang out with older guys, and then came to New York and hung out with Charlie Parker, he was spending all his time trying to figure out chords and rhythms and all that on his own. If you're going to be a player, you got to do it on your own, but you learn wherever you can. And for me, getting those courses at Berklee really helped. And when you put it together is when you play with other people. And then the real work begins.
Absolutely. No, and I don't want, there's like certain types of intelligence or how when you were in Connecticut coming up though, you learned by ear before you learned to read music. Is that's fair to say?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think everybody, especially on guitar. I learned to play by playing the pop songs on the radio, which for me were like Hang On Sloopy.
Absolutely. But I just want to, I'd love to get your opinion on this. Cause you talk to guys like David Hood from the Swampers, like they listen to the radio, but you didn't have a rewind button. Like you'd hear it one time, and then you'd kind of have to like use your imagination. And Gary Bartz would told me several times, one of the issues in modern the academy is, as it relates to melodic improvisation and jazz, is just there are kids today are coming up learning to read music before they can hear music. Therefore, their ears are locked. And that's why you have a homogenization of sound as it relates to, it's hard to pick out who's playing these days. Whereas before, you could put on a blindfold and or Bill Cosby told me, before the world caved in on him, he could put a blindfold on. He could tell who Mickey Roker was, Pete LaRocca, Matt. You could tell everybody had their own sound, and I just feel like everybody was ear trained. Eventually, you learn to read, but everybody learned by ear.
You got to play jazz by ear, it turns out. And I did start by trying to play blues completely by ear.
I love that.
And then by the time I wanted to learn jazz, I was presented with all these scales and stuff, but I only and which I worked on, but that didn't make me sound like I could play jazz. So I just listened to records and tried to get sounds. It's like what did Miles say? You got to play the better notes, and that's what it is. You have to work it out by ear, so you can make the notes that sound good, that sound like jazz. The scale or the mode or the chord and the extensions will give you a sound, but they won't give you any vocabulary.
Sco, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this in for you. Pay attention to the content, and we'll come back and break it down.
Well, I wasn't at all into Elvis or Little Richard. I had to turn my back
listen
on
to the content.
Stuff. And from about the age of 11 or 12 when I discovered jazz music, and that was it for me. And at that time, there was a kind of clear decision you had to make. If you liked jazz, you didn't like Elvis. And it wasn't, in fact, until I was 30 years old and started playing the electric bass that I felt obliged to go back and listen to source material to see what other electric bass players were doing, and discovered that there was a whole lot of music in there that was worthy of my interest, and that my snobism as a jazz musician had been unfortunate and had kind of blinded me to some music that was really worthy of my consideration.
Could you give some examples? Because if you were in the ghettos of New Haven, you were not necessarily a snob.
Well, that's true enough, but the music that was being played in those clubs in New Haven was essentially bebop vocabulary music with a lot of blues in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't rock and roll. It wasn't Elvis, and it wasn't even Little Richard, who was a lot closer in spirit and practice to the organ trios that lined the clubs on Dixwell Avenue in New Haven in those days.
Well, Sco got that right out of the bag. I could listen to that guy talk.
Yeah,
he's so beautiful, and I kind of had this dream last night that I'm like, maybe Sco was so hungry and his parents let him go that maybe he wound up on Dixwell Avenue seeing Swallow playing with Vernon Biddle and those cats. But that's a little...
Oh, I wish I had. Steve, he's my buddy.
I want you to just talk about how you connected with him late. Just take us through the Swallow.
I connected with him right, when I was maybe 21.
You did? Oh, boy.
But I was just leaving Berklee, and he came up there to teach. And we've been really close friends ever since. And he was really my mentor as well as my buddy.
Can you explain how he mentored, because that word gets used a lot, but I mean...
he just played good. And he would say, oh, you sound okay, check this. And, and then we'd play this tune and he'd say, oh, have you ever heard this guy do that tune? And then we'd listen to a record and then, he'd say, oh, those changes are wrong, check this out. And he would just talk about music. And we played together, and I could play at that point enough to play with him. I don't know if I was, and just hearing what he played when he would take his solo and how he approached the music and talked about the music, about his experiences. And we listened to records, we smoked pot and listened to records.
This is exactly, I just want to be there with you guys. Wait, hold on, 1970.
Well, it's going on right now.
No, but absolutely, no, but Swallow, did you, so around that time, when did you decide, did you get an offer? I remember Harvey Mason telling me that he was sitting around on a Saturday night and Alan Dawson, this is how great Berklee was at this time. And, whenever he was there, it was like he was sitting around on a Saturday night and Alan couldn't make the gig, and Harvey got a call from the Duke Ellington Big Band. Duke was coming through town.
God.
He got to play with Duke, got to play with Errol Garner. Did you get an offer? I know Vinnie Colaiuta bounced out. He went to L.A., but did you get an offer in New York? Like, what was the catalyst to say, hey, what? I'm out?
Jake, it was over a longer period, so various things happened. But what happened was in my second year at Berklee, Gerry Burton came to teach. And I was a Gerry Burton fan because Gerry Burton always had guitar in his band. So I would, in high school, I would go down to, take the train and go to the top of the gate and hear the band.
I love this.
First with Jerry Hahn,
man.
And then with Sam Brown, another
dude. We got to talk. Don't forget. Did you know him? You must have gotten to know him.
I met him. Yeah.
Oh, what a brilliant dude, man.
Slightly. Yeah. But so I heard Gerry's band, those bands, and I heard him at Newport when Keith Jarrett played with them, and I was this huge fan. And when Gerry came to school, I was like, why does he want to teach at Berklee? This is Gerry Burton. Gerry came and was teaching, and he heard my roommate, the really good drummer, Ted Siebes, and said, oh, this kid's really good. And we lived across the street from the school, me and a bass player, Chip Jackson, and Ted, the good drummer. We also had a set of vibes at the house. Wow. Gerry would come over every day while waiting for the traffic to subside before he went to his suburban house. Almost, like 3 times a week. He would come over and jam with us.
Oh, this is
and this was unbelievable, and I could hardly play, but I just, I hung in there enough. And that was this incredible thing. And then he said, I'm going to bring my buddy Steve Swallow to school, and he brought Steve to teach there. He brought a great drummer named Joe Hunt.
Dude, Joe's a dear friend, man. What a badass.
Yeah, and so he's one of the people that I got to play with who really showed me a lot. And I had an ensemble with Alan Dawson, and Alan, me, Chip on bass, and a wonderful vibraphonist named Dave Samuels.
I know him. No, I haven't. Dude, are there tapes of that? I need to hear tapes of that.
No, this I don't think so. We were just playing in Alan's room, and then Alan liked me. So he said, my friend Jerry Mulligan is coming to town. He needs a guitar player. You should do it. Wow. So Mulligan came to play at the Jazz Workshop. And before that, I had, been gotten to jam with Gerry Burton. I was friends with Swallow, and I was doing gigs around town with the various guys. I played with the Joe Hunt Quartet a lot.
Wow.
That sort of thing. And then Mulligan came, and this was in 1974. So I'd been up there for 4 years, right? I was just hanging out, but I could play enough so I could play with Mulligan. And then Mulligan invited me to play on a record, and I moved to New York. And that was in November of 74. And the record was Mulligan Baker Reunion at Carnegie Hall.
I was looking at your discography, and I was like, I've never realized Sco was on that date. So you were actually like in almost like your senior year, right? You were pretty much close to.
I would have been in my senior year, but I'd already dropped out because I was able to play enough in Boston, and yeah.
Can you talk about,
because I knew, Jake, I knew that I had to practice all the time and play with the good guys. I didn't need to take 4th year arranging, although that would have been great for me, but I wanted to learn how to play jazz. So I knew I just needed to put in the time, didn't need to go to school. And I was making a living playing. So my parents weren't like, what the hell are you going to do? I was making a meager living and living in a student house in Cambridge, Mass at that point,
Well, I went to Boston University. I mean, that's still going on, like you said. But I wanted you to, looking back, hindsight might be better for this, but just because cats today, I was watching a video of you playing with Jackie Green and Joe Russo and these guys, and I'm thinking like, these guys today, super immensely gifted musicians, but yet they have to wear all these different hats. They have to promote, they have to market, they have to, that's the reason the music was so beautiful at this period of time, Swallow, the 60s and 70s, is that it's just a hypothesis, and I want to ask you, it's just, even though you were making a meager living, even when you went to New York, were you able to just fully focus on the craft and the art itself? That to me is the biggest distraction today for younger cats, is that they're overwhelmed with wearing so many hats. And not that you had a huge record label deal or anything like that, but just the cost of, were you able to focus squarely on the art itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody I know could do that too. And you hustled in that you wanted to meet the good players, So there was this club, the Jazz Workshop, that we would all go hang out in.
Sure.
And the guys with big balls would, go up to Miles and talk to him or whatever. Because this was, and that would be the hustle, the amount of the hustling that you did, which probably never amounted to that much. But, that was nowadays, I think self-promotion on the internet is what everybody has to do. And I think it's distracting from the craft that we have to learn. I agree with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's when you got to New York, did you join Radio Registry? Right. I mean, I'm trying to.
Yeah, I joined Radio Registry, but I didn't get hardly any commercial work. I would have been a studio guy had that happened. And I did do some commercial spots that I got called for. I had joined Radio Registry because that was before answering machines even.
Absolutely.
If you, and I, for a while I was in Radio Registry, but the other guys like Dave Spinoza were really busy already. And I sort of just followed my jazz muse and really concentrated on that. And there was enough work in that area. Not the famous stuff, but just.
Well, this is where the rubber meets the road for Jake. I mean, because to me, like Spinoza, Joe Beck, all these guys, they already had the studio scene locked in, So like, was there in '74? Was there still some kind of scene in? I know the Lower East Side had it, but in Harlem, I mean, were you playing? Can you talk about some of those?
I didn't play in Harlem at all.
Where were you playing? You weren't playing the Vanguard or anything like that.
No, yeah. I was playing with whoever would have me. and
I love it, dude. Who was that? So who were those people? I want to know. 74 Skull. Okay. Like who brought you in?
Jake. Yeah. I had a really good gig with the Billy Cobham George Duke band.
Yeah, that's a really good gig.
And I did 2 years with Billy Cobham. Billy Cobham kind of discovered me after I played with Mulligan. Cobham. There's a drummer named Horace Arnold.
A ridiculous drummer, dude. I've interviewed him. Dude, I always call him Horace C, but it's Horace.
Yeah, maybe that's correct. I'm not sure. Yeah. But so Horace heard me through the Dave Samuels, the guy we're talking about.
Sure.
Who was my buddy, who I was already telling you I was playing with, and we were still in Boston, but he said, "Would you do these gigs with my band?" And we drove down to New Jersey to do gigs where we lost money playing with Horace, but we're playing his music. He'd already done his Tales of the Exonerated Flea record.
Dude, these are my favorite albums, dude. I mean, it's unreal stuff on that.
Yeah. So he had done that record, and we were, playing some gigs, right? Just a few gigs. And then he said, "Listen, I want to do another record from Columbia, but they want me to do a demo before they'll let me do it." And my friend Billy Cobham is going to produce the demo. So we went into Columbia Studios on 30 whatever street it is, and played for 2 hours of the songs that Horace had written, and Billy was a producer. Billy's band, he had left the Mahavishnu Orchestra. He had this incredible band with the Brecker Brothers and John Abercrombie.
Absolutely, dude. Total Eclipse. Yeah, those and Alex
Total
Blake.
Eclipse.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. Yeah. And Alex on bass.
Right.
And I used to go hear those guys when in '74. I was still in Boston. I'd go hear them at the Jazz Workshop and
Paul's Mall.
Yeah. And then so Billy hears me, and I had met John Abercrombie that same year, and we were kind of friends. John was above me in the pecking order for certain,
Sure.
and was already on the scene. He was playing with Jack DeJohnette's group, and he had made his own record, Timeless, for ECM, and he left Billy's band in that winter of '74, the December, I guess, end of '74. And Billy called me. I joined his band, the Brecker Brothers. I moved to New York. All of a sudden, I had the greatest gig,
Dude.
And so I just completely lucked out, Jake. So I spent 2 years with Billy's band, first with the Breckers and the horn band, and then with George Duke in a quartet. It was called the Cobham Duke Band.
Al Johnson, yeah. No, there's some ridiculous live footage of that band, and you're just having a ball.
Yeah, and so, I was playing those shitty gigs around New York, but mainly I was busy playing with Billy Cobham on the rock and roll circuit, man. It was like the fusion days,
Oh my God, this is exactly this is so freaking cool, man. I mean, wait, and I don't want to be clear. Horace did Tales of the Exonerated Flea. He also did an album called Tribe, but then did the album that you demoed with him, did that ever see the light of day?
I don't know. I guess he did something, but I got scooped up by Cobham.
Right, you're gone. So it just demo stuff. I'm just trying to search for that early SCO, like there's like some album from 70.
There's nothing before the Live at Carnegie Hall with Gerry, where I'm a total rookie. And then the first album I did with Cobham, which was called A Funky Thide, THYDE, of Sting.
Thank you very much. I knew that. A Funky Thide, yeah, however you say that.
75, and the Breckers are on part of that, and those were the first things I did, and then I'm hanging out in the band with George Duke. It was pretty famous, and that's when the whole fusion scene was going. We did a tour with that quartet with Duke, of Europe, and it was our band, Weather Report, Shakti, John McLaughlin's Shakti, Larry Coryell's solo, and Herbie's Headhunters.
Dude, that's life changing for people, man.
Yeah, and we would also play shows opposite, especially those bands, in the States too. So I got to hear Weather Report. I got to meet Joe and Wayne. I got to meet Herbie and Benny Maupin and that whole scene, and it was just wonderful. Great time.
It's so beautiful, man. I mean, this is just unbelievable. So you basically, at that time, that's the other thing I wanted to ask you. Like, you go back to 67, 68, Perla had a loft, Liebman and Holland and Chick had a loft, and there was a lot of mescaline and also just a lot of free jamming. Grossman was involved, Breckers were there. This is pre-SCO. Was there a viable loft scene when you were, before you got hooked into, Cobham and Duke?
Yes, that was all going on in New York. So now we're talking about 1975.
Right.
And so I had the gig with Billy, but we weren't on the road all the time. I was living in New York, and there was.
Where were you living, by the way? Lower West Side?
West Village.
Yep. Right.
And I lived on Barrow Street.
Beautiful.
It was when it was affordable. I lived with my girlfriend, Amy Molina, she was a flute player from Berklee.
Beautiful.
And we moved down together. And it was before I was married. Now I'm married to Susan Scofield.
Congratulations.
That started in 1977. So that wasn't long after that. But, I'm playing around and trying to get into jazz. But there was this whole other jazz scene that I wasn't privy to, that I wanted to get into. And that was, the Woody Shaw band, McCoy's band, all the, Bobby Hutcherson, all the guys that were playing around in the clubs at the Vanguard and that thing. And so I was sort of just trying to hang out and meet some of those guys. And, but I was playing fusion, which I also liked, whatever that music was. And then there was that whole studio scene of those guys. And I always thought, well, maybe I could get into that. But, so the loft scene was going on. There were all the, there was the Ladies Fort and Studio Rivby And these
Well, I don't. You got to wait. You're dropping knowledge right now. Where were these places? Dude? This is unbelievable.
That was kind of like on the Lower East Side, I believe.
How do you spell that? Rivby?
Rivbea. It was St. Rivers Loft. And these are places I just went to a little bit. But my buddy from Berklee, Joe Lovano, who had been my playing buddy up when we were in school together, he moved down the same time as me. He was more in that, as a junior jazzer, and was going and hanging out at Sam's studio. And Ornette lived on Prince Street, and he would have things occasionally at his loft. And there were other places too. There was a club called the Tin Palace that had a lot of.
Well, that's a heavy place. No, I was gonna
So that was all going on, but I was just looking at that. I wasn't at all part of that. But my friend Joe, he was ballsy, and he would get in and play with those guys. I remember seeing him around 77 with his horn, and he was going in to sit in with Archie Shepp,
this is what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm so glad you brought this up. So I have this audio. It's not queued up, but Joe Chambers, I'm not sure if you ever played with him, the drummer.
I never did. I'm very familiar.
Yeah, and he's a fierce drummer. And he told me that, basically Eiler and Shepp, and the way that guys like Larry Ridley and Chambers, and I'm not sure about Freddie Hubbard and those guys, but those guys, the guys at Blue Note, the guys that were making those Blue Note albums, they really did not respect what Eiler and Shepp were doing. Now, what Chambers told me was, he goes, those guys couldn't play changes, they couldn't hold a gig at Radio City, they were squeaking and squawking, they were playing altissimo, but yet, as I've continued to ask other people, they say those guys, in fact, did know how to play changes. They were just tired of this idea of saying, well, in order to be a competent jazz musician, you need to demonstrate incredible facility and have a huge bag of, you need to know standards, which I agree are important. But I was going to ask you about Sonny Chirac. Were there avant-garde? Talk a little bit about those avant-garde musicians, because a lot of the jazz purists, which I don't really think you are, they looked at those guys and said, I don't know what they're doing, but there's no tradition. I just want you to take the floor on that.
I would, if I hadn't started with Billy Cobham and stuff, I'd still be trying to learn how to play How High the Moon, and I still am here at home.
Sure.
I'm a purist, locked in 1977 fusion.
Well, dude, that Lionel Hampton record, man, that you can put me in my grave with that, dude. That is unreal.
That's hilarious.
It's great, dude. No, but were you fascinated by Chirac, Blood Ulmer, those cats?
Not really.
Yeah. Talk about
that.
As
a guitarist, those guys didn't speak to me.
Sure.
I thought, actually, Eugene Chadbourne was really interesting. Whoa. But I wanted to play free, but I wanted to play free more like on the guitar, like Dewey Redman or Keith. I
did.
Or Ornette.
Yeah.
Paul Bley, the guys that were more grounded in bebop, and we're taking that to the next level. And I think, Albert Eiler, that was so strong that how could, who cares if he hasn't put in the time to play changes? Who cares?
Well, I agree. I completely. No, there was. It just.
I know you do, but the truth is that he couldn't. I don't think really nail the changes. Because why would he bother? He's Albert Eiler. He's got his own conception. And that's the problem with all of us jazz musicians, is that we are in a way saddled by history, by this music advancing so much, bebop and then Coltrane and whatever, that there's so much to cover that it maybe sometimes stops people from being original.
I love where you're going with this, man. I mean,
and that's the beauty of the free jazz movement. That's why it existed, because some people said, wait a minute, we have to do something different. Otherwise, we'll spend our lives trying to learn how to play like Charlie Parker. And it didn't mean that they didn't love Charlie Parker.
I love it.
But meanwhile, the guys that really could play inside, Lee Morgan and Joe Chambers and Herbie and stuff. Not Herbie, but I mean, I don't know for a fact, but there's always been a jazz attitude, like, because they were in competition with Albert Ayler, and they were like, man, that stuff's sad. Dig us, we can really play. And I understand that. I understand that point of view.
Well, no, and I forgot to mention this part.
Like when Miles came up with fusion and stuff, everybody hated that. But Miles decided I have to do something different.
He was bored to death of bebop. He was bored to death of,
okay, you know what, Jake? Miles was never bored with bebop. He might have, he may have said it, but I knew Miles. Miles loved bebop. He loved jazz. He loved the whole tradition. He would talk about it forever. He just made a conscious attempt to play something different, because when he was coming up, bebop was something different.
That's right.
And Miles was an artist, and he knew that he felt good when he was in that area that was uncharted, and that freshness, which I imagine he was in when he was playing with Charlie Parker's first quintet.
I failed to mention this part of the story with Chambers was that Stanley Crouch, rest in peace, he said to Joe, this is just a journalist talking, but he said that at 44, younger generations like Gen Xers, millennials, the folklore of free jazz starts with, Ayler and Shep, those guys, like, their names are at the top of the list. When Stanley Crouch said, in fact, in his mind, the real free jazz was the mid-'60s Blue Note albums that guys like Hutcherson and Joe Henderson and Andrew Hill were doing, where you could hear the tradition, they were playing changes, there was blues, and then obviously there was some new vocabulary as well. And I think that you're right, they were in competition with those guys. It's just fascinating to me to hear that intra-squad sort of, back and forth about respect, because, to me, it's all music. I mean, did you, what do you think about that word jazz? I mean, that to me, I go back to Big Black and him talking about, jazz, JASS. And then all of a sudden journalists, like white journalists, came along and was like, yeah, we can monetize this. We got to get rid of that. We can't have jazz. We got to put Z's on it. And now it's like me and you could walk down the streets of New Haven or wherever and ask 20 people what their definition of jazz is and get 20 different answers, where I think it was just much more rooted in the blues. Obviously, in the mid-'70s, that fusion thing came along. It was so fresh at that time. But can you talk about that word and what you feel about that? You used this word before. Us jazz musicians are saddled by the history. And I just wonder if part of it is just the idea that now we live in this time where we're just stratified by labels.
Well, yeah, we always have been.
We always have been? Have we always have been? I don't even know. I feel like before with freeform radio.
I don't know. Yeah. We have as long as I've been around. But there was a time, when jazz was, it's like, maybe, I don't know what kind of music is really new. I don't know, but jazz was this new music and this new idea in 1924, I don't mind the word, because who the hell cares? You know what I mean?
I just come from the Duke. It's all music to me. I feel like, because the music exists in another place that's different from language. So, I don't even want to try to explain the kind of music I like in words, because the musicians know, that stuff. Yeah. And I love it.
And you like it, and then you say, oh yeah, that's sort of like that. And then it's got this other element in there. We all use the labels, so I don't mind jazz and fusion. I've given up minding it, because I don't know, I want to talk, I want to speak. Absolutely. So you have to use some words,
I think I was talking to, maybe it was Eric Deutsch. I just love the fact he said to me, that you called him up and was like, "Who's the best rhythm guitar player in New York?" And he's like, "Oh, that's Avi Bortnick." And
Actually, who was I called Charlie Hunter.
That's
who
who,
I had
that's
heard him. I had heard him, and we were friendly. He dug me. When I got into that whatever jam band scene that was, I was already an old veteran.
I love. No, first of all, I love what you bring to that scene.
The year 2000. So I was started to play some stuff like that. But I wanted to get a rhythm guitar player, and Charlie Hunter told me get Avi, who was living in San Francisco at the time.
You couldn't have made a better choice. I just wonder. I mean, we sort of vetted that. You consider who was somebody that Burton, who was or Swallow, like who opened. I feel like that was the magic of the apprenticeship. I mean, I've interviewed Cedar Walton, coming out of Blakey's band. Mm-hmm. All these guys came out of bands. It was just these, and here you are. Asking around who's the best rhythm guitar player. Of course, Bortnick. So you're still a talent scout, and you got that. Who was the talent scout for you? Was it Swallow? Was it?
Well, it was Swallow and Gary Burton, but I didn't get the gig. You know who got the gig? Pat Metheny.
Yeah, that's right.
Pat Metheny came to Boston. Gary discovered him somewhere in Miami, and I'm playing with Gary. I'm getting to jam with Gary. I'm like desperately trying to learn the chords to Chick Corea tunes and Steve Swallow tunes. And Mick has the gig with Gary. He was the guy in the band. And all of a sudden, Gary says, "Oh, I met this guitar player. He's even younger than you, and he plays his ass off. I'm going to have him join my band." And I was like, "Oh, shit, over for me." And then Pat came to Boston. We became friends, Pat and I. But, it was Gary and Steve and that thing, but then jazz. And I met Gerry, Mulligan, who was wonderful to me. And I took a lesson from Jim Hall. And this was all the jazz guys. And there was also, Herb Pomeroy and John Laporta and Joe Hunt and John Neves on the bass and Herb, did I say that? And these great players up there, some other guys that are even less known.
Because I'm also like...
those are the Boston guys. They were into bebop and stuff. And all of a sudden, because I had a background in rock as a kid, Cobham hires me to join his band. So that's a whole other world. Like Cobham was like, forget it for bebop. I'm not into that. Come play with me, kid. And you see those 2,000 people that are like, breathlessly awaiting my approach. It's like, here we go. And it was like the rock and roll scene as far as like the gigs.
Dude, it was exact that you were there.
So the jazz guys that I had met and was learning from and continued to learn from, that was on hold a little bit when I was with Cobham. And then after my 2 years with Cobham, Gary Burton hired me because Pat Metheny quit his band. So I got to play with Gary for like 6 months or something. And then Gary, bless him, I had a substance abuse problem at that time. I think that's why Gary let me go. And Swallow was a bass player in that band. And Gary said, well, I'm going to just change and not have guitar anymore. But that ended. But then I got back into the jazz scene, and I got to play with on a Mingus record. I got to play on a couple of Jay McShann records.
Yeah, I saw that. That's insane.
And I'm just around New York doing whatever, but I'm still working on jazz, and I'm playing with Swallow. We had a trio that would play whatever shit gigs we could get in the New York area.
Who was on drums? Who was on drums?
Adam Nussbaum, great drummer.
Beautiful
Adam
drummer,
Nussbaum.
yeah. Great. No, that's the other thing. You were like the lonely stepchild in Boston because the Burton, I know you know this, but he made an album on ECM that I love with Abe Goodrick and Harry Blazer on drums.
And Harry Blazer. Well, see, I was just
where's Sco, man? Why does Mick get the nod?
I could hardly play in 1973.
That was a rock album. That was a really funky album.
But that was the band. Before Metheny joined it, that was the group that Gary put together when he first moved to Boston. And it's funny because he brought Ron McClure and Joe Hunt with him, and they thought they were going to be in the band. But then he heard Abe and Harry, and he got them and Mick.
Dude, that's unbelievable, man.
But I was there for that, and was an underling on the Gary Burton world. But then when I moved to New York, and started playing with Cobham, it all changed. And then whatever that music was, and that's when I met a whole new bunch of people. And the Brecker brothers were very, very much an influence on me, because they were older than me, and it really played well. And they were already doing their Brecker brothers band, and then they had their own club, that I would hang out in and everything.
7th Avenue South. No, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have been getting off on this one live show, and now it's crystallizing, and I'm like, Sco might have been in the audience for this. I actually think one of the most, the Mahavishnu Orchestra gets all the pub, Weather Report. I actually think the 11th House with Coryell.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, Mandel.
Yeah.
Did you see them at the workshop? Because they used to come. Al Muzone is playing at the same, he was at the same level as Cobham. I've never heard a drummer play like him, dude.
He was. And then the 11th House, we would play shows opposite them. But I had heard them at the workshop. And then when I joined Billy's band, we played a couple of times, I remember, opposite 11th House, and Muzon was tearing it up, and Muzon was like, I'm going to get Billy tonight. It was a battle of the drummers.
Dude, I'm like, dude, if there's one guy who could really go toe to toe with Cobham, it was Al, man. It was unbelievable to hear him, man.
Yeah.
I got another Name That Voice for you, Sco, and then we'll come back.
I understand that we can't do anything alone. We need each other, and we borrowed from each other. We got each other gigs, and we pointed to gigs, and we pointed to the musicianship that other was presenting. But I didn't know which direction my potential success was going to come. It was John Hammond that made the difference. He heard me at a R&B club.
That's
I was right
George.
behind Go-Go Girl. And James Brown used to come down from the Apollo.
You got to name that. You're 2 for 2, man. That was George Benson. James Brown asked Benson to be in his band in the 60s, and he's like, I'm a jazz musician. He turned him down.
He didn't need James Brown. No.
Well, he said it took him 11 years to make Breezin', so he became, I guess maybe my question is, when, in your mind, like, did you feel like you were actually not just able to sing for your supper, but, like, feel like comfortably like you had made it? I mean, Benson became a international sensation, but, like, was it during the Miles years, or is it have you made it yet? I mean, I'm just curious.
By the time when I got the gig with Miles, that did a lot for my self-confidence and for my standing in, the jazz hierarchy. And, so I started to be able to get my own gigs that were not at a pizza place, and that's when it changed. So that's, I joined Miles in 82.
How did you wind up, did you ever approach him, like at Boston, or how did you wind up getting that gig?
No, in Boston, I never did. I would go hear the band, and was a Miles fanatic my whole life almost. But Miles came down to 7th Avenue South, the Brecker Brothers Club we're just talking about, and Dave Liebman. I was in Dave's band. Now, Dave, after I left Cobham, and I played a little bit with Gary Burton, I joined Dave's band, Dave Liebman.
Love him, dude.
I played with Lieb for like 3 years or something. And, Dave didn't have so many gigs, but we did a bunch of Europe tours and played all over the States. We played the Vanguard, and so here I am getting to play quote unquote real jazz, with Dave. And I learned so much from him. And we were playing, and Miles came down one night. This was probably like 81 or something. And that's when I met Miles. And the story is Dave said, I'm going to introduce you to Miles. And I went to the table where Miles was sitting with his shades on. He had like his white fur coat on. A couple of incredible like models were hanging out with him. Beautiful.
It was like 79 or something? 80?
Maybe it was 79,
yeah,
80.
Yeah.
And so he was in retirement, but he was hanging. And I said, Miles, I love your music so much. And he goes, no, first Miles did say, he said, yeah, you sound good. And I said, Miles, I love your music so much. And he goes, shut the fuck up. and that was sort of just.
Man, it's such an easy thing to just walk right into that.
And that was. Then I got the gig with Miles 2 years later, and I'm not even sure if he remembered that.
I was going to say, one guy that I wanted to ask you about, because he tried his darndest to talk to your wonderful wife about me a few years ago, but he left this earth, is Jack Wilsh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Jack, I got to send you that interview, because he talked about that dude gave Crosby the tuning for Guinevere. I mean, that dude was an avatar, man. He was a nasty player.
Jack was a lovely player and human being, and I miss him.
Did you know, because he's from Ohio or something? How did you guys even?
He's from Columbus. Well, this was, my wife, Susan, her brother is Mark Bingham, who's a producer, and recording engineer, guitarist, songwriter. He lives in New Orleans, but before he lived in New Orleans, he lived up here in New York. And there was a little scene, with Mark and me, and Jack would come over, and Mark's girlfriend at the time, Jean Shaw, and a really good another guitarist, rock guitarist, Brendan Harkin. And so we were all friends, and that was through my wife Susan, who by 1977 I've met. And we all just hung out together back in the early days.
Sco, do you think we could do part 2 in a couple weeks? I just feel like we just started to scratch the surface here.
Yeah, if you want. Yeah,
that'd be great. I take it that your European tour didn't materialize.
Well, I was supposed to play in Russia this week.
Oh dear. Well, that would have been that. What a that might have been the most viewed. That would have been the most incredible concert ever. Unfortunately, there's just.
Oh boy, yeah, but that was canceled, obviously. So yeah, I've been grounded. I was supposed to play 5 concerts in Russia, but I am going out, mid-April. But if you want to, just send me an email.
Yeah, let's sneak another one in before you get out of here, man. It's just so good to hang with you.
No, it's fun, Jake. Thanks.
Thanks, Sco. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. Well, another one in the vaults, John Scofield, legendary player, great human being. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We will see you later.